I'm really happy to be talking about starting your first Power BI project. And what this talk is going to primarily be about is kind of at a high level what we've seen has the most success with helping people get started with Power BI and kind of scoping that project, at that Goldilocks zone, not too big, not too small, and in a way that can kind of help get traction and onboarding and all that kind of stuff. So this talk, it's going to be at a very high level, and it's going to be a little bit short. And the hope I have is that you all are going to have questions. So I'm going to try to keep an eye on the Q&A. I'm also hoping Bill or Carlos can pop in if necessary in the middle if there's a question that comes up. Otherwise, we should have a good amount of time for discussion afterwards because I know every business is different, every business is unique. And so I'm going to talk kind of high level what we've found to be successful. What we want to talk about is what makes a good Power BI project. And in my mind, my experience, there's four main qualities that we're gonna talk about. The first one is small, and we'll talk about that because small means a bunch of different things. But we've done projects that were 30-page dashboards for customers, and those struggled. So if you're just looking into Power BI or just starting with and you don't have the depth of expertise with the tooling, you really want to make it almost as small as possible, and then a little bit bigger. And what I mean by that is, you could go tiny, tiny, tiny and have one page and a couple tables and say, this is a Power BI report. But one of the things I'm going to talk about is you need enough content to show people what's possible, to show them what makes Power BI different and valuable, and to start inspiring ideas of what they could do next, right? You want to get that flywheel turning that we'll talk about. So a good Power BI project is small. And we'll talk about what small means because there's kind of breadth and depth and all these sorts of things. Second, it's iterative. And I know that the idea of agile has become so ubiquitous that sometimes it seems like it loses all meaning. And it doesn't necessarily have to be in sprints or anything like that. But in my experience, it is very, very rare that a customer knows exactly what they want. I think working with Carlos, we've done one project where that happened, and it was shockingly pleasant, where the customer literally gave us a spec sheet and it had, here's the wireframes of how we want it laid out, here's the measures that we want to define, and here's where you're going to find the data. And it took us a third of the time, right? Like that was a quick project. That didn't require much in the way of iteration. We were able to just deliver, they were able to validate, and they were pretty happy. And then later they came back around and said, hey, we've got a different project, and that one had a lot more discovery. But BI is a field that I found that there's just constant iteration. And part of that, I guess there's a couple reasons for that. One of them is the distance between the implementer and the domain expert feels large. When it comes to a lot of programming, a lot of the stuff that the developer is doing they can self-validate. They can prove that it sent an email and an alert was sent out. They can prove that the website renders, all this kind of stuff. But it's very, very hard to self-validate when you're doing business intelligence. You can make sure that the report runs. You can apply certain standards of how you think it should look. You can apply certain best practices. But ultimately, you need someone who understands the business and can validate the business logic. But you also need someone who understands the aesthetic that you're trying to appeal to. And so usually there's a big gap in that knowledge, and so it requires iteration. Third, you want to demonstrate surprising value. This is the quickest way, in my experience, to success when we do a project. And we'll talk about what I mean by that, but generally it's people have experience with reports. They've used Excel, They might have used paginated reports like Crystal reports or SQL Server reporting services. They probably have some type of existing report today. It might be exports from an accounting system. And so they have a general idea of certain things they're looking for. They want to be able to display the data. They want to be able to do a certain amount of slicing and dicing and filtering. Um, and where we have the most success is we meet the needs of what they're looking for, but then we show them here's the next step. Here's how you can start answering questions. Here's how you can go further. Here's how you can have contextual information. Um, and, and so we have the most success there because what people think, uh, what people expect a traditional reporting system to do, and what Power BI can do tends to be different. In large part because Power BI is very heavily focused on interactive reporting. And for a lot of folks, that's a novel experience. So you want to show surprising value, and you especially want to inspire ideas, right? A successful project, a first project, is the kind of thing where you have a very small scope of work, you create some value, you create a report, you create a page, you show it to them, and they not only say, yes, this is what I wanted, but they say, oh, I didn't know you could do that, and oh, that gives me an idea. That's the progression that you want to get. These are the four things that at least whenever we do a project seems to have the most success, and our target audience tends to be small medium businesses, right? The situation is likely to be very very different when it comes to large enterprise because there's more constraints to deal with. But again, if you're here, you're likely someone who maybe heard Carlos say the word Power BI and you're like, this seems like it's popular. And so these things kind of apply there. So small means different things. And I think it means different things to different people. But for me in particular, when I say the project should be small, um, I think for us, in terms of hours, that's something that we could do in 30 to 50 hours or something like that. But there's a couple different ways of looking at it. So the first thing to think about is that Power BI is and a Power BI report is made up of different components, and some of them are not visible to the user. So first you have your pages and your visuals, right? And so those are pretty easy to enumerate, pretty easy to understand, because that's the thing that you tend to see. But then you have the data model and you have the business logic. So you have all the tables you're bringing in, you have the relationships, and then you have the business logic. And so an example is it's common to do year over year comparisons, right? How are my sales this year compared to last year? And you have to write a little bit of code, DAX code, to be able to make that comparison, to make a measure that's able to display that. So you have to create this logic. And so you could have a report that's only one page, but you've got 20 different measures that have been defined, or there may be 20 different tables in the data model supporting that, right? You also have data transformations. So very rarely is the data perfectly clean. Um, but also, a lot of times we need to add or remove things when we're pulling data from a transactional system. Usually, I start by getting rid of nearly everything except for what I know that I need, and then slowly add in pieces. But sometimes I might have to make a custom column. So I might have to make a full name column, for example, or maybe you're doing aging for invoices and you need to break it down into the specific buckets for that aging. Um, and so you may need to add columns that way, or you may need to create tables completely from scratch, which is extremely common when it comes to say like a date table. And then finally, we have to bring in data, and we may have to do work to make that happen. So hopefully the data all exists in a relational database. That's often the easiest to work with, but a lot of times it's in Excel or in flat files or something like that. And so you may need to do work to get that into an accessible format. So these are all these different moving parts. And I want to make a distinction when we talk about size. So the first is breadth. Just how many of these things are there? How many pages are we doing? How many reports? How many visuals? How many tables? How many transformations? But then there's also depth, there's complexity. And so these are two different things. And what I'll talk about is you want to keep it small in a way that allows you to get to user acceptance testing and demonstrating value as quickly as possible. So we'll talk about that more. And the combination of these two is the total surface area of all the work you have to do, right? And I think that it's easier to understand, okay, how do we keep the breadth small, but a little bit harder to understand how to keep the complexity small. But in either case, you want to minimize these. But what you'll find is that generally you need a certain amount of complexity to show them things that they're not used to seeing. So let me give you some numbers. These are kind of based on my personal experience. Let's see. Okay, I just saw some chat. No questions so far. So what does small mean in terms of numbers? These are ballpark numbers. There's no hard science here. It's just based on my personal experience. So in terms of pages, what you're going to want, ideally for a first project, in my opinion, is somewhere between like 2 and 5 pages. Um, if you have just a single page, it's generally not enough to show people what you can really do with Power BI. Because the common way that you're working with Power BI is you're showing information at a high level, and then you're helping them answer the next question by going to a more detailed page. You may also do this with rich tooltips where you hover over something and it shows you a kind of a visual with contextual information. But generally speaking, one page isn't going to do it. People are used to kind of traditional single pane of glass dashboards, and that doesn't provide enough of that complexity to be able to show what the interactivity and data exploration pieces are possible. And then 5 is kind of a rough upper bound. In my experience, when you start getting to more than that, what tends to happen is that you're focused on filling out that breadth without thinking about how can we excel in this report? How can we do even better? Usually it's more just about, okay, I just need to get stuff on the screen. And again, in my experience, there's an iterative process where you get the data, you make sure you understand the relationships, you do some basic modeling, you validate that that works, and then you say, okay, well, what do you want to be able to do with this and how can we help support that? And then, like I said, you want less than 10 visualizations per page. I mean, a lot of times what it tends to be is, say, 3 or 4 high level KPIs on the top, and then 2 or 3 visualizations on the bottom, like a table or a bar chart or something that allows you to start digging into the specifics. In terms of tables, in my experience, a lot of times you're wanting like 3 to 8 tables. You want enough tables that not only can you look at the data, but you can then filter it by certain categorical information, right? So you generally want some kind of business event table, a transaction table, and then you want some stuff that you can filter on. So that's going to be date a lot of times. If it's sales, it might be salesperson. If it's scheduling, it's going to be employees, all this kind of stuff, right? So you you want at least one kind of verb table, what the business is doing, and then at least 2 or more tables of, okay, how can we filter this? How can we narrow this down? How can we kind of break it up? Carlos, did you have something or
You'll forgive me for jumping in, but
no? Please.
um, part of the, I guess, another thought here. And I think you did kind of mention it.
Yeah.
Maybe the flip side, or another way of thinking about this is, the problem. Like, where is the data for the problem that you want to try to show here, right?
Yeah.
And you just need enough to kind of get some of those answers. But don't try to do the whole database, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. No, that makes a lot of sense, and I agree. Like we want there's this idea of, if you're making a statue, you can either start with a big hunk of marble and chip away until you have the statue, or you can start with clay and add to it. And almost always it's better to start with the clay and add to it, in my experience, right?
Sure.
And
Until
so,
you right, until you've done it a couple of times, you're like, okay, I know what I'm doing. Right now,
yeah.
I can, you know,
So yeah, we want just enough complexity and just enough breadth so that we can show some of the wow factor kind of stuff. But you really don't want a lot. You don't want to
right.
pull in the whole database. You want to focus on how do I answer their question and then answer the one they didn't know they had.
And you
And
know, and in another, you know, kind of like in the same
yeah,
vein, or to kind of kick this a little further. So again, I know Kelly's on, and inevitably, right, a lot of times we'll see Power BI will kind of be, I'll even say, forced upon us because somebody else has seen something and they're like, I want
right.
that. Right. And so it can be challenging. And I think, you know, what we're suggesting here is, okay, well, they say they want that. Okay, maybe have them pick out their favorite thing of that, and yeah, and start there, right? Don't try
Yeah.
to replicate the entire, you know.
Yeah. A lot of times I'll ask, what are the five most important things you care about? I'll ask
Right.
people like, well, what are you actually going to do with this? Because a very common pitfall, and one we ran into recently with a customer is they'll show us this complex Excel report, and if you try to just do a straight migration, it's just going to be a bad time, right?
Right.
I mean, it's like trying to cook toast with a butane torch. You can do it, but that's not what it's meant for.
Sure.
And
And,
so
and it
you
is
really want to,
interesting how
yeah,
often that will change, right? Because so they have that spreadsheet. They're like, oh, well, this is the way they've been doing it. Oh,
yeah.
but this is really the way I'd like to do it. You
Yeah,
know.
Power BI is very much a data exploration tool, and so you want, and we'll talk about a little bit more that like people just don't appreciate that at first, and so you want to show them what can be done. So yeah, the big thing with this idea of small is you want as simple as it can be, but just enough complexity that you can show them how the data exploration works. Um, the number of transformations here, this is again kind of like just an upper limit. Keep it as simple as possible, but as a rule of thumb, if you got more than like 10 or 12 transformations, you're doing way too much work starting out, right? You should be able to understand and explain very easily what you're doing for each table. Um, for measures, less than a dozen. Again, just keep it small, keep it simple, and then ideally you want simple relationships. So you want a star schema. You want we can if someone has questions about what a star schema is, we can talk about that. But the idea is all of your tables should exist either to display aggregate information or filter that information, right? The way that I think about a lot of times is verbs and nouns. You know, verbs are things that the business does. It invoices, it does work, it makes sales. And then the nouns are customers or employees or these other things. And so if you can keep it in that kind of form, then you're able to make the reporting more quickly. It's a lot cleaner and it goes with the flow of Power BI. So the next piece is we want to talk about iterating. And what you want to do, and this relates to what we were talking about, is iterate with vertical slices. So, we have this whole idea of like, okay, maybe a customer comes to us and says, hey, I want this report and it needs to be 12 pages and needs to do all this stuff or whatever. What you want to do is you want to focus on vertical slices. So this is common when it comes to things like video game development. Is I'm sure all of you at some point, even if it was back in the shareware days, have played a video game demo, right? And the whole idea is it has the entire gameplay capability, but just for say one level of Mario or what have you. It's not the whole breadth of the thing. And in my experience, the faster you can get to a vertical slice, the better, because you're able to start testing that and you're going to have course correction, you're going to have change orders, all these kinds of things. And the sooner you can get to that vertical slice, the sooner you can start making those course corrections. And so why iterate? And there's a couple of things. So the first thing is people don't know what they want. And this is not a
Yeah.
criticism of
Yeah.
business users, right? Like if I had to design a logo or if Carlos had to design a logo, right? And he thinks, oh man, I really want like this with the swoosh to show the database is growing or whatever. And then an artist makes that logo, Carlos is gonna be like, oh, I was hoping for green or something like that. Like
Sure.
people, they don't know what they want until they see it in front of them and they're able to say, oh, no, I was thinking something different, or oh, that doesn't work the way that I expected. And so you have to expect to iterate. Again, very different than, say, programming. Like programming has iteration, they have sprints, all that kind of stuff. But again, it's a little bit easier to kind of design things, at least in my experience, where with BI, it's a, a kind of a hand-holding exercise. We gotta walk through it all and figure it out. But another piece is people don't know what's possible. That's part of the issue, right? People
Right.
don't know what Power BI can do. They don't know some of these best practices. And so again, you just have to plan for iteration. By aiming for these vertical slices, you can iterate as fast as possible. And so I think that's really, really important. And
And I guess I
go
will
ahead.
add
Yeah,
there as well, Eugene, is that
please.
you may not know what's possible there, right? And so trying to throw
Right?
everything together, and again, you're like, well, I want the lines, that what were those lines? What was that Sanchez wanted? He wanted, like, there was some visualization. He's like, oh, it has to be
Oh,
like this.
spark lines.
Spark
Yeah.
lines, right? Like, yeah, I
Oh
want
my
spark
goodness.
lines, and it's like, okay, well, how is
Yeah,
that going to help
that
make a
was a time
decision? And
because, well, and that's and it changes, right? So
right,
like the funny thing is, if we were doing that same project today, would have been super easy because spark lines. So for anyone who doesn't know, these are kind of tiny little line charts that are inside a row of a table, right? Really cool from a visualization perspective. That's a native feature in Power BI now. But 4 or 5 years ago, when we were doing this project with this customer, and he read a book that said spark lines are good, which they are, um, there was like two or three options. One of them was you were hard coding the spark lines in CSS, so like SVG, like image code,
right,
or which is not well supported, or we were using this Power KPI visualization that allowed you to look at a bunch of different KPIs all at once. It was really great when you had 10 KPIs, but he wanted to have one for each product, and it was so slow, really difficult. And so, but that changes. So there, you're right. Like, I don't want this to sound like it's completely on like helping the customer understand what's possible. Sometimes we learn stuff. Like, I mean, there have been times where, doing work with one customer, and he's like, "Oh, can we do a drill through from one report to another?" I'm like, "I think I got to look into that, right?" And they put out updates every month, so sometimes it's a learning process for everyone involved.
sure,
Um, but the user validation is really really essential for a couple reasons, right? So one is it because it's a discovery process for everybody, but also it's easy to get off track, and so it's easy like I talk about that example. I'm thinking of I think it was Chemtree. We did this 30-page dashboard or whatever it was. And thankfully, the person we were working with had a good idea of what they wanted. But if they had just given us a general spec and we just went off and did it, we could have spent 100 or 200 hours and have no idea if we were hitting the mark or not, right? And
sure,
that's really really painful to do. And that's why a lot of organizations are kind of skittish about some of these business intelligence tools, because that's what's happened, right? Some executive or someone said, you know what, we're going to use this tool, start making reports, and there was a disconnect between the people making the reports and the users, and so you create something that nobody wants, right?
right,
um, and so iterating and focusing on these vertical slices allows us to get user validation as quickly as humanly possible. And we tend to find that we start getting a lot more traction once we can have someone say, yeah, those numbers look right. They match with what I expected. Yeah, that's the logic I'm looking for. And then the final piece here is you have to demonstrate business value. And for some folks here, that may seem kind of silly working inside of the business. For us, we have to show that this is actually something that's going to help drive things forward. But I think it's true for everyone. And so again, that vertical slice, it just makes it so much more manageable because we had we've got a project we're working on right now, and it's kind of a weird blend because on paper, we're making two reports for this customer. But in practice, we're helping them refine their processes and get away from storing manual data in Excel and all this kind of stuff. And so we're having a challenge of getting things over to that point where we can start putting stuff in production, start doing the validation piece. But because of the way we're working on it, we've been able to show business value, right? We've been able to show this is going to help the business, and here's why. And so for these last 2 points, you want to get there as quickly as possible.
Yeah. So Luther's comment, right? And we risk creating the Power BI models that mirror SSRS reports without taking advantage of features
Right.
of Power BI, right? There's that.
It's a common problem. Yeah.
Now, I would like to caveat. I'm
Yeah.
going to asterisk, right,
Yeah,
on the
please.
demonstrated business value. It does not mean to the whole business, right?
Right.
It could be a very small, like, again, whoever your champion is, or, it's the marketing department, right? It's the product line manager. It's
Yeah.
the, I mean,
Some type of stakeholder that can
yeah,
say, you know what,
I
this is
find
worth
this
continuing.
valuable. That's right. Yeah, right. It
Yeah.
doesn't have to be for the board, right? That all of the board members use and, every day.
All right. So we'll add in Carlos's asterisk. Demonstrate business value to someone.
To someone.
But yeah, it doesn't have to be everyone. That's for sure.
Preferably somebody with decision making power, but someone, right? Like,
Yeah, or a wallet.
that's right. That's
Whatever
right.
works. Okay. Oh. So what does that iteration cycle look like? So again, in my experience, you want to get just enough. Sorry, I'm a little. Oh, that's annoying. Okay. Sorry, I'm getting distracted because there's some stuff that's supposed to appear, but it's just white text, so I can see like a little ghost on the screen. Anyway, so get just enough data, right? So get just enough data to be able to create some of those first measures to display some of that basic data. So again, that's the way that I like to work is I never, ever, ever, ever go, okay, I need these 12 tables, I'm going to pull them all in. I work from a verse and say, okay, I need to be able to show year over year growth in sales. Okay, well, where are sales from? Do we have a date table? What's the date for sales? And so sales is usually, okay, now we need to go look at invoices or whatever. Um, and so I get just enough data and I get just the columns that I need, right? I may grab some stuff that I think is going to be useful, but again, I try to keep it really simple. Then I do the work to display the data. So, I create the models, I create some basic measures. And then the key part is we do some user testing. So you want to get from A to C here as quickly as humanly possible. Um, and sometimes they go, no, 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 that's not what we want. And so you go back, right? And so you have to be prepared for that. You have to be prepared for the iteration piece. But a lot of times you are able to actually show value. You're able to show this is going to make your life faster and easier and better. And in an ideal circumstance, what also happens is that you inspire ideas, right? Is it's not just, hey, this is useful, but oh, what if we did it this way? So example that we had is we're doing some work for a company called Flight Service Pro, Flight Schedule Pro. I get it mixed up. FSP.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we were able to do is we were able to show them how we can do breakdowns for customer growth by certain buckets. And that helped inspire ideas because then they were able to start thinking, well, what are these other buckets that we might want to look at? Right. And so whenever you can start sparking that creativity, that really gets the whole thing going. Right. But this tends to be the iteration cycle that we run into, and it works well for us, in my opinion. So like I said, people don't know what's possible, even developers often. Perfect example, this is from Marco Russo and Alberto Ferrari, and you can see it's from 2018. They haven't updated in like 4 years. And it's still super useful to understand, okay, what can we do? And I we had a customer who was like, okay, I have this table information. I don't know how to show it. And I posted this in the chat and he printed it out the same day because he wanted to like put it up on his wall. Um, and I think this is a perfect example of people are used to certain types of ways of looking at data, certain types of visualization. But with Power BI, there's a lot of features hidden beneath the surface, and there's a lot of ways that we can show some of that information. So what you want to be able to demonstrate is what I call surprising value. So there's three ways that I think about it. There's hidden value, and this is frustrating for me as a developer, as a consultant, because a lot of the things that is great about Power BI is is difficult to communicate and is never going to be seen. And so what I mean is, um, a lot of it comes from good data, good modeling, making it extensible. So we have a customer where that Excel report that we're helping them migrate away from, it's got 12 different pages, and they're all mostly the same page. There's some minor variations, but the reason there's 12 pages is because each one relates to a different type of work center, right? And with proper data modeling or good use of filters or what have you, we can build a page once and then reuse it for each of those work centers, right? But that's not necessarily something that an end user is going to see. So you have value that you're adding that's hidden or hard to see unless you're talking with another report developer or something like that. Usually it's stuff that's making your life easier, making you more productive if you're the person who's doing the development. Then we have expected value. So these are tables. These are kind of descriptive charts of like, okay, here's the data. So bar charts, really basic line charts, pie charts, what have you, and then basic filtering. I want to be able to look at a specific year. I want to be able to look at a specific company. These are all things that are expected. These are table stakes, essentially. But where we want to try and get to as quickly as possible is the surprising value. These are the things that they may not be expecting, but again, it starts inspiring those ideas and it shows them that, okay, Power BI is a different tool. And so what that tends to be, one of them is what I call rich context. It's the idea that, okay, I have 12 salespeople and I can see that this person had the most sales for the year. What are the ways that I can show the why or answer the question why or show the next level of detail? And with Power BI, you can add a rich tooltip where you hover over and then it can show a chart, or you can do a drill through to another page, or you can click on it and do cross filtering, all this kind of stuff, which leads into the whole data exploration thing. How can you empower people to be able to answer their own questions or answer the next question? And then finally, how can we make kind of novel comparisons? So again, people are used to a certain amount of line charts and things, but I think anything we can do to compare different categories, to show things over time, all that kind of stuff. So do more than just display the information raw, but to actually do these comparisons. This is where people go, oh, and their eyes light up and they start asking for more things. And a perfect example of this, oh wait, sorry. And so much of the value, much of the stuff that you're doing that's actually helping the business is hidden. And because a lot of it's avoiding rework. It's like buying insurance, right? Like nobody sees the value of an insurance policy until something goes wrong. And so a lot of the work with Power BI is like an insurance policy. We're trying to make a clean data model so you can expand it. Nobody ever sees that. And so you have to lean on the stuff that's very visual, very contextual, and is kind of surprising. And so a perfect example of that, some examples is anything, like I said, anything that can help answer that next question. So that's drill throughs, that's tool tips, that's visual trends over time to give them an idea of like, here's what's going on and being able to answer why. And so one of my favorite visuals for this that I've really grown on is the decomposition tree. This is a perfect example of what you want to be able to do. So here's a picture from Microsoft. And so the decomposition tree is really, really awesome because it's kind of like artificial intelligence light. And we've used this with a couple customers and they've been really, really satisfied. So the way that it works is you give it they make it look way too complicated here. It's
Yeah.
really simple. What you do is you give it a measure. So here it's a percentage on back order. In my experience, it usually works a little bit better with things that you can easily add up. So more like absolute numbers. So say number of leads as opposed to percentage of leads or something like that. And then you give it some factors that could be driving that. And so for let's see, what was the one with the for the one customer with FSP, we were looking at, okay, they're adding new user logins, and driving factors are how big is the fleet, how new is the company, um, you know, what type of company they are, that sort of stuff. And so the decomposition tree will say, okay, based on these factors, here's the biggest driver. Here's the one that has the most difference in the range. And then you can go another step down and another step down. And then based off of this, you could have a drill through and say, okay, it looks like our growth is the most in customers that have 50 or more planes. Well, let's take a look at what's going on with that. Let's see some more of this detail. Let's see some of the why, right? So this is what I kind of think about when I talk about this surprising value is people are expecting to be able to see the data as is and see a few charts. But if you can help them answer their own questions, then you can really get a lot of investment. You can very clearly demonstrate value and you can start getting ideas because when they see, okay, our back order percentage is up and it seems to be in this one warehouse or for this type of product, then they start thinking, well, what kind of report can tell me the next answer? It can tell me why that is, right? Some really cool stuff. So just to kind of wrap up, and then we've got 5 or 7 minutes for questions. What makes a good first Power BI project? Small and iterative. You want it big enough that you can show value and in ways they may not expect, but you want it small enough for a feedback loop. So that means the breadth should be really, really small so that you can have these vertical slices. And the depth needs to be somewhere in the middle so that you have enough detailed data so you can start answering the second and third level questions. Then you want to show surprising value and inspire ideas. So that's encouraging exploration and showing these kind of comparisons. A decomposition tree is just a bunch of comparisons between different categories, right? And so that helps them say, oh, it's not just the data, it's why. And oh, this is interesting. And oh, how do I look at that next kind of piece? So that's the main presentation. We got about 5 minutes. Does anyone have any questions? More than happy to answer questions on this or general Power BI kind of stuff.
You once again have impressed them, right? They're speechless.
Stunned into silence.
So maybe
Also-
perhaps another.
Also, I guess we have more time than that. I was looking at the timer at the top there, but that's okay.
No, you're
So,
fine.
yeah.
The other piece is that as you come, right, and you're like, hey, picking your first Power BI project, what are some obstacles that you found, and is there anything? Yeah, perhaps
Yeah.
you're just looking for advice, or hey, what would you do if you were in my situation, kind of a thing, right?
Sure. Yeah, so some common kind of obstacles. I think the first one is underestimating how difficult it is to work with Power BI. And it's not a bad tool, but the issue is that a lot of the data modeling is unintuitive, especially working with DAX. And so there's going to be a learning curve. And so you want to have something, again, that fits in that simplistic model so that you can increment on it and build as you learn. Let's see. There was a question real quick.
Yeah, Luther does have a question.
Yeah, would you use Power BI for a live real-time dashboard? So it depends how live we mean, right? If you want something that's updating less than every 15 minutes, I probably wouldn't recommend it. So there's a couple different levels of real time, right? When it comes to streaming data, I can't really recommend Power BI. That's not what it's built for. It has some basic support for that. But a lot of the power of the engine is the fact that it's able to pre-aggregate data and to display that quickly because it can compress and encode in a way that's effective. Um, Now, for a dashboard that's telling you throughout the day, I would definitely consider that, right? So you could use direct query. You can mix and match the import mode and the direct query. So we've got one customer where they've got one page and it's like current information, and then they've got the week over week stuff on a different page, and you can totally do that. But Power BI at its core is designed for, I would say, at a cadence of daily updates, maybe a little bit more frequent than that, and being able to support a large amount of historical data, so like millions of rows and that
Right.
sort of thing.
Yeah, because the other problem you can then run into is the, again, the old reporting issue of, hey, now my reporting tool is now creating workload on the transactional system, and it's bogging it down, right? Every time it has to query, just depending on what the source of that data looks like.
Yeah,
So it's not to say that every Power BI query is going to be a bog, but
yeah, you start to
you
be
know,
thoughtful about that. Whereas if you're doing like nightly loads, the data's
yeah.
cached essentially, right,
Yeah.
in PowerBI.com. So that's a
If
great
you're now,
question,
I guess
Andrew.
I'm dating myself a little bit here, right? But if you're, Scrooge McDuck or whatever the guy is, and he's like,
Yeah,
you've got an owner that wants to be able to click the refresh button and know exactly what sales are, for the year, on December 31st, and he's then that could be challenging, right? In a live, in a real time report.
yeah, yeah, definitely. We did have one question by Ryan. Where do you draw the line by user interactions versus what is pre-built for them?
So the question is, out of the box versus custom. I kind of feel like that's what you're asking. Is that
No, I don't think
no?
that's I think it's more like how do you draw the line between canned reports and stuff where you're expecting them to kind of do that exploration, right? How much oh sorry, not placing a joint. That's fine. I'm gonna just take a guess and
Oh,
then
here
Ryan,
we
you can
go.
correct me if I
You
okay,
were correct,
cool.
Eugene. This is why we
Nailed
have
it.
you and not me.
That's why I'm
Kind of
here.
doing
Yeah,
this
that's my
thing.
question. So
Yeah.
no, that's a great question. Um, so the way that I think about it is it is okay if some users are just going to view the reports as is and not going to do a lot of interaction. And so the way that I think that you should think about it is assume that there's going to be some users that never do a ton of interaction. Design a report to support that. I think the bar that you should expect from people in terms of, okay, we're going to train you to this point, you need to learn to get to this point, is like filters in the filter pane, right? So I think it's reasonable to expect people to be able to modify and apply basic filters. Like, okay, we're looking at 2022, we're going to look at 2021, we're going to look at a specific filter. Beyond that, the way that I treat it is everything else is extra. And so I make sure that I have the core functionality working, and then I add in the extra stuff in a way that's quick and simple and easy to do, right? And so I'll add a single chart for a rich tooltip. I'll add a very basic drill through that has some of the detailed information, but I don't assume that that's a mandatory part of the workflow.
They want, right?
Yeah, and thankfully a lot of the way you can design this stuff supports that because for drill throughs you can hide those pages, and for tooltips they just pop up when someone hovers over. And something like a tooltip is pretty intuitive based on people's experience, right? So that's kind of the line that I draw is I think it's reasonable to expect people to understand how filtering works. And if they don't, to expect that you should take the time to train them on that. I think everything else should be okay. Some percentage of my users are going to be motivated to find the next answer. I'm going to build in interactivity. And sometimes that may come out of, okay, well, you're asking for a second report that does X, Y, and Z. We can just add a page and expect a little bit of user interaction, and you can get the same functionality, right? And so sometimes you can meet their new requests with kind of interaction requests of your own, and it can sometimes it's a win-win. It's fewer reports, and they're able to get what they need.
Thanks so much, Eugene, for being here, and awesome. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.